Welcome to my channel.
And this is English Podcast Station.
All right, ready to dive into some really practical English for our listeners?
Always. What have you got for us today?
Well, we're looking at business English today, specifically English Podcast Station, Episode 2.
Okay.
They're tackling sales meeting conversations, which honestly I think could be a bit tricky even for native speakers sometimes.
Oh, for sure.
Definitely. So this episode's designed for beginners, which I thought was interesting. What do you think about that?
I think it's a great starting point. Business English can feel intimidating for a lot of people.
Right.
And starting with something like sales meetings, it's something that a lot of people will encounter.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's a good way to sort of dip their toes in the water, so to speak.
I like that analogy. And thinking about it, why is mastering these kinds of conversations so important? Not just for sales, but anyone learning English for business.
Well, I think, when you think about it, so many professional interactions, even if you're not in sales, have that element of you're selling an idea. You're presenting something, you're trying to get your point across, you're negotiating something.
You're persuading.
Exactly. So if you can confidently navigate a sales meeting in English, that really boosts your credibility and it just opens up a lot of doors for you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I really like how in this episode they use a mock sales call to break down the language.
Right.
I thought that was a really clever way to give context to phrases rather than just like listing vocabulary words.
I think that's really effective because, you can learn words, but if you don't know how to use them, it's really helpful.
Right, it's all about application.
Exactly.
Now, they start by focusing on greetings and introductions.
Okay.
Which sometimes they can feel a little stiff in a business context.
Right.
Did you find their advice for that section helpful?
Yeah, I think they did a good job of emphasizing that it's important to be clear and concise,
right, but
also to be friendly and approachable at the same time.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a balancing act.
It is a delicate balance for sure.
Yeah.
Especially when you're trying to build rapport.
Yeah, for sure.
Did any specific phrases jump out at you in that greeting and introduction section?
Oh, I really liked how they offered alternatives to kind of the standard phrases. Like instead of just saying, I'm from company name, they suggested saying something like, I'm representing company name today.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
Which sounds just a little bit more polished.
Yeah, and it's still friendly.
Exactly.
It's just a little more businesslike.
Yeah.
And I also really appreciated how they emphasized active listening, even in those initial moments.
Yes, definitely. That's so crucial. Showing that you're genuinely interested in what the client has to say can really set a positive tone for the whole meeting.
For sure.
It's all about building that connection.
Right. Yeah. And I wrote down a couple phrases that I thought were really effective for that. Okay. Like, that's a great question. Or, I understand your concerns.
Yeah, those are really good.
Just those little acknowledgments to make the client feel heard.
Absolutely.
Now, once the introductions are done, obviously, the conversation moves toward understanding the client's needs.
Right.
And this is where things can get a little more challenging, I think.
Yes.
For non-native speakers.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to know vocabulary, but then you have to use it effectively to get information.
Right. You have to be able to actually use the language in a way that gets you what you need.
Yeah. And to really pinpoint what the client's pain points are.
Exactly.
What are their challenges?
Yes.
I was impressed with how James and Erica provided specific question frameworks for that section.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. So instead of just asking what are your needs, which is a bit vague, right? They suggested phrases like, can you tell me more about the challenges you're facing with? And then you can fill in the blank with whatever area it is.
Yeah, that's a much more targeted approach.
Exactly.
And I also like how they talked about using open-ended questions.
Yes.
So, instead of just saying, are you happy with your current solution? Which could just be a yes or no.
Right.
You could say, what are your thoughts on your current solution?
Yeah, I like that. It invites a more detailed response, and you get more information that way.
And so all of that is really about steering the conversation in a way that helps you understand the client's perspective.
Exactly.
And then you can use that to tailor your pitch.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that brings us to, I guess, the next key part of a sales meeting, which is presenting your solution.
Right.
And this is where I think, the real selling comes in.
Yeah, this is where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, and where a lot of English learners might feel the most pressure to articulate their ideas clearly and persuasively.
Yeah, for sure. It can be nerve-wracking, even for native speakers.
Absolutely. So I was really happy that they had some advice specifically for beginners, on how to structure this part.
Yeah, me too.
I think they did a good job of breaking it down.
Yeah, they really emphasized focusing on the benefits rather than just listing features.
Right.
And I think that's so important because, anyone can just list off features.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the technical details.
Exactly.
But ultimately, what the client wants to know is, how is this going to help them?
Right, exactly. What's in it for me?
Exactly. So they suggested thinking about, okay, what are the features, but how do they translate into tangible value for the client?
Yeah. So like instead of saying, our software has a reporting function, you might say, our software can help you save time and make better decisions with its advanced reporting capabilities.
Right. Much more compelling.
Exactly.
And they also suggested using storytelling to make the pitch more engaging.
Oh, I love that.
You too.
Because a good story can really capture people's attention.
And make it memorable.
Exactly.
And it helps to demonstrate how the solution can solve the problem in a real-world context.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've covered greetings, understanding needs, presenting solutions.
Right.
What's next on their mock sales meeting breakdown?
Well, I think the next crucial part is addressing objections.
Right.
Because let's face it, no sales conversation is complete without some objections from the client.
Of course.
It's natural for them to have questions or concerns.
Of course, yeah.
And how you handle those objections can make or break the deal.
Absolutely.
So this part can be a bit tricky.
Oh, for sure.
Even for seasoned salespeople.
Yeah, but I thought they gave some incredibly useful strategies in this episode for handling that part.
Absolutely.
What stood out to you the most in that section?
Well, I think the first thing they emphasized was active listening and acknowledging the client's concerns. It's so important to show empathy and understanding, even if you don't agree with their viewpoint.
Of course.
It's about validating their feelings.
Right, so phrases like, I hear what you're saying, or that's a valid concern.
Exactly.
And then from there, you can address the specific objection.
Right, but you've already kind of made that connection.
Right, you've acknowledged their feelings.
Exactly.
And then they talked about giving clear and concise responses.
Yes, and backing those responses up with evidence or example.
Yeah, whenever possible.
Yeah.
And they even gave some really helpful phrases, I thought.
Yeah, they did.
For addressing common objections. Like if a client says, your product is too expensive.
Yeah.
They suggested saying something like, I understand you're concerned about the price. However, it's important to consider the long-term value and return on investment that our product offers.
Yeah, that's a great way to reframe the conversation and focus on the benefits rather than just the cost.
Yeah, absolutely.
And another thing I thought was really helpful was that they encouraged listeners to practice their responses.
Oh, that's so important.
To common objections, because it's one thing to understand the concepts, but it's another to be able to actually say them smoothly and confidently in the moment.
Yeah, in the heat of the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So practice makes perfect, right?
Definitely. Practice and repetition are key.
Absolutely.
Now, moving towards the close of a sales meeting, there's the big step of closing the deal.
Right, the moment of truth.
How did James and Erica approach this?
Well, they started by talking about the importance of reading the client's signals throughout the meeting.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so it's not just about getting to the end and then trying to close the deal.
Right.
It's about paying attention all along the way.
Right, yeah.
See, what's their body language like?
Yeah, are they engaged?
Exactly. What kind of questions are they asking?
Right.
And then, based on that, you can kind of gauge the right time and approach for closing.
And they also warned against being too pushy.
Yes, absolutely.
Which I think could be
a big turnoff.
A big turnoff, yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody likes to feel pressured.
Exactly.
So instead, they suggested offering a clear call to action, but still respecting the client's decision-making process.
Right, so giving them a choice.
Right.
But also making it clear what you would like them to do.
Yeah. Did any of their suggested closing phrases stand out to you?
I really liked the one, based on our conversation today, do you think our product would be a good fit for your needs?
Yeah. I like that one.
It's very open-ended.
Yeah.
But it also kind of steers them towards...
Yeah, it plants the seed.
Exactly.
Also, are you ready to take the next step and schedule a demo?
Yeah, that's a good one too.
Yeah, and I think what they really emphasized was ending the conversation on a positive note.
Yes, definitely. even if the client's not ready to commit right then and there.
Right. You still want to leave the door open.
Exactly. Maintain that relationship.
Yeah. And be professional.
Yeah, absolutely.
And finally, they wrapped up by talking about following up after the meeting.
Yes, that's so important.
Yeah. Whether it's thank you note or additional resources.
Yeah, or scheduling a follow-up call.
Right.
It just shows that you're serious about helping them.
Right.
And that you value their time.
It solidifies the connection.
Exactly.
So, wow, they covered a lot of ground in this episode.
They did.
It's like a roadmap for navigating sales conversations.
Yeah, it really is. And I think what's great is that they present these concepts in a way that's really accessible, even for beginners.
Yeah, and engaging too.
Yeah, definitely.
They don't make it sound dry or boring.
No, not at all.
And I think we've only scratched the surface
Oh, for sure.
of what this episode has to offer.
Yeah.
There's so many nuances and practical tips that we could delve into even further.
Absolutely.
And that's what makes this deep dive so exciting.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Me too.
Yeah.
Okay, so now that we've laid the groundwork,
Yes.
let's shift gears a bit. Okay, so now that we've laid the groundwork, let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that really stood out to me in this episode.
Okay. What's that?
The whole idea of cultural considerations in these sales meetings.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, because what's considered polite and professional in one culture
Right.
might be totally different somewhere else.
Exactly. And I think James and Erica touched on this a little bit
They did.
when they talked about directness,
Right.
being direct.
Yeah.
You know, in some cultures, it's perfectly fine to be very straightforward,
Yeah.
get right to the point. But in other cultures, that can come across as really harsh.
Yeah, or aggressive even.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a really important thing to be mindful of.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that they encourage listeners to really do their research before jumping into these cross-cultural conversations.
For sure, especially in a business setting.
Yeah, the stakes are a little higher.
Right.
And I think they also mentioned humor. Like, humor can be so tricky.
Oh, it's a minefield.
Yeah.
Especially across cultures.
Yeah, because what one person finds funny
Right.
might be offensive to someone else.
Exactly. So unless you're absolutely sure it's going to be well received,
Yeah.
it's probably best to err on the side of caution.
I think that's good advice in general.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of cultural considerations, I was also really interested in their discussion of nonverbal communication.
Oh, yeah. Body language, eye contact, all of that.
Yeah.
That's a whole other layer of communication.
It is, and it's so powerful, even if we're not always aware of it.
Right. Exactly. It's often subconscious.
So they talked about eye contact, for example,
Okay.
which, again, varies a lot from culture to culture.
Yes.
In some cultures, direct eye contact is a sign of respect.
Right.
But in other cultures, it might be seen as challenging or rude.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So it's really important to be aware of those norms. And they also talked about posture and hand gestures. Even something as simple as crossing your arms
Yeah.
could be interpreted as defensive or closed off.
Yeah. Or fidgeting can make you seem nervous.
Right.
Or like you're not paying attention.
Exactly. And it's not always intentional.
Right.
But it's sending a message.
It is.
So I think for English learners, this is something to be extra mindful of.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's not just about the words you're saying.
Right.
It's about how you're saying them and
Yeah.
how you're presenting yourself.
Exactly. The whole package.
The whole package, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think James and Erica did a great job of highlighting these nonverbal cues
Yeah, they did.
as part of creating a positive and productive meeting.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that those cues can vary so much from culture to culture.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's always good to do your research.
Now, shifting gears a little bit, I'm curious to explore how this episode, even though it's focused on sales, can benefit English learners who might not be in sales roles.
That's a great question.
Not everyone listening is going to be in sales.
Right. But I think the key here is transferable skills.
Okay.
So while the specific language might be tailored for sales,
Yep.
the underlying principles are relevant for so many different professional situations.
Okay, so what are some of those transferable skills you're thinking of?
Well, communication, persuasion, relationship building. I mean, those are all crucial in any job, right?
Absolutely. So even if you're not selling a product, you might be selling an idea.
Exactly.
Or you might be trying to persuade your colleagues to see your point of view.
Right. Or you might be negotiating a deadline or a budget.
Or even just having a casual conversation with coworkers
Yeah, it's all about connecting with people.
and being able to express yourself clearly.
Exactly.
So those skills are valuable no matter what your job is.
Absolutely.
And I think what makes this episode so helpful is that it breaks down these complex skills
Yeah.
into manageable steps.
Yeah, they give you concrete phrases and frameworks that you can start using right away.
It's like a toolbox for communication.
I love that analogy.
Right. And by practicing these techniques
Yeah.
in the context of sales meetings, you can gain confidence
Yes.
and fluency that will then transfer to other areas of your professional life.
Absolutely.
So it's a great starting point.
It is.
And it brings us back to that key takeaway, the importance of practice and repetition.
Absolutely.
Language learning is a journey,
It is.
not a destination.
Right.
And the more you practice,
Yeah.
the more comfortable and confident you'll become.
Absolutely. And, James and Erica even suggested recording yourself,
Oh, yeah.
practicing these phrases and scenarios.
Yeah.
Which I think is such a good idea.
I love that because it lets you hear yourself
Yeah.
and identify areas for improvement.
Exactly. And you can track your progress
Yeah.
over time.
So you can actually see how far you've come
Exactly. And it's like having your own personal language coach.
right in your pocket. Now, before we wrap up our deep dives into this episode,
Yeah.
I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier.
Yeah.
The importance of tailoring your communication style
Yes.
to the specific cultural context.
Right. Because what works in one culture might be a total disaster in another.
Exactly. And I think they even gave an example of small talk,
Oh, yeah.
like the concept of small talk,
Right.
which varies so much across cultures.
It does.
In some cultures, it's essential for building rapport.
Right.
You have to chat about the weather or the weekend before you get down to business.
Yeah.
But in other cultures, that could be seen as a waste of time.
Right. Or even disrespectful.
Yeah. So again, it's about being adaptable.
Yeah.
And being respectful
Absolutely.
and being aware of those differences.
Yeah.
Now, as we move towards the conclusion of this deep dive,
Okay.
I'm curious to get your thoughts on how listeners can take these insights
Yeah.
and apply them to their own English learning.
That's a great question. So I think, the key takeaway here is that learning business English,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be scary.
Right.
It can actually be fun.
Yeah.
And it's about breaking it down into manageable steps,
Right.
practicing regularly,
Yeah.
and just being aware of those cultural differences.
And not being afraid to make mistakes.
Exactly. Mistakes are part of the process.
Absolutely. So I think James and Erica did a fantastic job
They did.
of giving listeners the tools and the inspiration to do just that.
Yeah, they made it seem very achievable.
Right. Like anyone can do this.
Absolutely.
It's not just for experts.
Right.
So this episode is really a valuable resource
It is.
for anyone who wants to improve their business English.
Yeah. No matter what your level is.
Whether you're preparing for job interviews,
Right.
presentations, negotiations, or even just casual conversations with colleagues.
Yeah, it's all about communication.
It's all about communication.
Yeah.
I think that's a great message to leave our listeners with.
Yeah, I agree.
So to all the English learners out there
Yeah.
who are working hard to improve, we encourage you to embrace the journey.
Yes.
Celebrate your progress and never stop learning.
Absolutely.
Because even small steps taken consistently
Yeah.
can lead to really amazing results
We can.
over time.
Yeah, and with the right tools and the right mindset,
Yeah,
you can achieve anything.
you can. You really can.
Yeah.
So on that note,
Yeah.
I think we've reached the end.
Oh, already.
I know, right? Time flies when you're having fun. But that's a wrap
Okay.
for this deep dive into the world of business English.
Yeah.
And we hope you found it insightful,
Yeah.
inspiring,
Yeah.
and most importantly, that you feel empowered to take the next step
Absolutely.
in your own English learning journey.
Yes. Keep learning.
Keep learning. And you know what? Before we wrap up, there's something else I wanted to touch on.
Okay, what's that?
That whole idea of confidence, how important confidence is for mastering business English.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can know all the right words and grammar,
Right.
but if you're not confident,
Yeah.
it's hard to really shine.
Yeah. It's hard to use the language effectively.
Exactly.
And I thought James and Erica did a good job of addressing this
Yeah, they did.
by encouraging listeners not to be afraid to make mistakes.
Yeah, everyone makes mistakes.
Right. Even native speakers.
Oh, yeah, all the time.
And it's really all part of the learning process.
Exactly. I mean, how else are you going to learn
Right.
if you don't make mistakes?
You have to make mistakes to improve.
It's like, it's how you learn.
And I loved their suggestion of keeping a mistake journal
Oh, yeah, that's a great idea.
where you write down the mistakes you make
Uh-huh.
and how you can correct them.
Yeah, that way you're actually learning from them.
Yeah, and it kind of takes the sting out of it a little bit.
Right, because you're not just beating yourself up over it. You're like, okay, I made this mistake,
Yeah.
but now I know how to do it better next time.
Yeah, it's a learning opportunity.
Exactly.
And it's about shifting your mindset from that fear of failure
Yeah.
to a more positive, curiosity for improvement.
Right, and I think that's a really important lesson.
Yeah,
Not just for language learning.
for life in general.
Exactly.
And speaking of confidence,
Yeah.
I really like how they talked about celebrating those small victories along the way.
Oh, yeah, that's so important.
Because, sometimes it can feel like you're not making progress.
Right.
But if you really stop and think about it,
Yeah,
you probably have come a long way.
absolutely. And those small wins,
Yeah,
they really add up
they do.
and they keep you motivated.
Yeah, so give yourself credit
Absolutely.
for how far you've come.
Yeah.
And I thought their suggestion of recording yourself speaking English
Yeah.
at different intervals was a great idea for that.
It is, because then you can actually hear the difference,
Yeah.
from where you started.
Yeah, and that can be really motivating
It can.
to hear yourself getting more fluent,
Yeah, for sure.
more confident.
Yeah, it's like, oh, wow.
I'm actually making progress.
I can actually do this.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what stood out to you the most from this episode?
I think what I really appreciate about this episode
Yeah.
is that James and Erica, they made business English seem less intimidating.
Yeah, less scary.
Yeah, they presented it as a set of skills that anyone can learn
Right.
if they're willing to put in the work.
The effort.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not this mystical thing.
Right, it's not magic.
It's not magic, yeah.
It's something you can actually learn and get better at.
Exactly. And they broke it down into those manageable steps.
Right, they give you a roadmap
Yeah.
for how to do it.
And they emphasize those cultural nuances, that confidence building.
It's all in there.
It's a great episode.
It is.
So to all our listeners out there
Yeah.
who are working on their business English skills,
Keep going.
keep going.
You got this.
Embrace the journey.
Yes.
Celebrate your progress.
Celebrate those wins.
And never stop learning.
Never stop learning.
Well said. And on that note, that wraps up our deep dive
It does.
into the world of business English.
All right.
We hope you found it insightful,
Yeah.
inspiring, and most importantly, that you feel empowered to take that next step in your own English learning journey.
Keep learning, everyone.
Keep learning.